Hello and welcome to a special transmission of Newswire. Now, early Wednesday morning, Pakistan shot down 2 Indian Air Force fighter jets within the airspace in Pakistani-administered Kashmir and launched airstrikes at 6 targets in Indian-administered Kashmir. 2 Indian pilots were also taken into custody. One was injured and was shifted to a military hospital. The other one has confessed in a video of his identity being Wing Commander Abhinandan of the Indian Air Force. This has further heated up tensions between Pakistan and India, and this development comes a day after Indian aircraft crossed the line of control, only to be chased out minutes later by the Pakistani Air Force. Ever since the Pulwama attack in the southern part of Indian-occupied Kashmir, where an SUV packed with explosives rammed into a bus carrying India's Central Reserve Police Force, killing 42 personnel, India has been beating war drums, pointing the finger at Pakistan. Now, keep in mind, all of this is happening as India's Prime Minister Modi's battered BJP party is campaigning before the general elections, which are just a few months away. Until today, the mass hysteria on Indian news outlets and social media had been celebrating India's blatant violation of the line of control, carrying on a rhetoric that bordered on the delusional, with claims from India having eliminated alleged terrorist camps, of course, consequent pressures from the Pakistani military spokesperson, political leadership, all of whom, with an open invitation, was given to international journalists and third-party observers to the site of alleged attack. That didn't deter the Indian daydreaming that has been going on until the downing of 2 Indian fighter jets and consequent arrest of an Indian pilot that took place earlier Wednesday. Now, this is, of course, no small matter when 2 nuclear-armed states get into a situation like this. For that, we will be speaking to a whole slew of experts from across the world to break down the turn of events, providing you an analysis of what has happened from an international diplomatic standpoint and what is the possible way forward. With that, I would like to introduce my guest. Joining us from California, we have Mr. Kaza, and also from New York, we have Mr. Rafiq Kathwari. Both of you are journalists and a political analyst, and also our analyst in the Islamabad studios joining us, Ms. Kirsten Seymour. Welcome to all of you to the show. So let me come to you, Mr. Kaza, if I may. Just reflecting on the turn of events, first of all, I'd like to take your opinion on how this, what has happened today, and how do you see it?
Things have escalated very quickly, and what I see is that India took this opportunity of what happened in Kashmir as an opportunity to really escalate the situation, and they try to shift from a domestic concern, which is a Kashmir problem, to a problem between India and Pakistan. And this has really escalated the tension. And this is something that I think many people didn't expect. But at the same time, India is in an election cycle. So it's in a way, it kind of makes sense for them to do that.
So stay with us, Mr. Khan. Let me come to you, Mr. Rafiq. If you were to assess in terms of not just what happened in Pulwama, very sad incident indeed, but the way it has escalated through the lens of the media, how has it been reported in the West? What insight can you give us?
As a Kashmiri, I think that I want to pick up from something you said earlier about the way forward. What do we do now? I think in all this jingoism going back and forth that India did this and Pakistan is going to retaliate, I think all this Kashmir, the voice of Kashmiris is getting lost, is not heard. And that's why I think it's important for Pakistanis who call Kashmir their jugular vein and Indians who call Kashmir their integral part, they have to decide who wants to be party number 2 or party number 3, because Kashmiris are party number 1, and we can be a bridge to bring both these nations together if we are given the chance. That's what I like to stress, that Kashmiris have a voice, and even though some of very important voices are in jail in Kashmir at the moment, but there are voices here in the diaspora in New York, in England, that can be pulled together to make a way forward, to find a way forward. That's, I think, what I'd like you to understand beyond the jingoism.
Beyond the jingoism. Mr. Rafiq, that's a really good point, and something I want to explore further, as Indus News has extensively covered the events, not just in Sierra. One thing we've heard through various journalists sitting in Srinagar, Kashmiri journalists, is exactly this that you've pointed out. But let me quickly come to you, Kirsten. Let's talk a little about the turn of events and how now we're hearing that from the Foreign Minister of India during the Foreign Ministers meeting in China, between China and Russia. So there seems to be a bit of a change after those jets went down. What do you make of this?
Yeah, here on the ground, as a Westerner and a foreigner, it's alarming given that both of these countries have nuclear capacity. And Prime Minister Imran Khan referred to that today, sort of alluding to small events or presuming that these are small events, although these are not actually small events whatsoever, that they can suddenly turn into huge things. Like world wars have started with small, seemingly small events, assassination in a very small area in the Habsburg Empire that started a world war. And the military, well, I would say actually the multipolarity and the geostrategy of Pakistan and India is really important because you have all kinds of external players involved. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I think that's going to be an interesting thing to see is, are people playing, Pakistan has been called a client state for the war in Afghanistan, which it certainly has been. And now we're looking at what the international community doesn't understand is how important the eastern border is for Pakistan. Pakistan has made it very clear that in Afghanistan, it will not help the United States or the NATO troops, exit from Afghanistan if they have to focus on the eastern border, i.e. being India. So that makes the United States have a very serious vested interest in this being a peaceful process. I mean, obviously it's not peaceful now, but it not escalating. Again, you've got China involved. So China's got a counterplay against, it even has some claim to part of the Kashmir area. So this is a very interesting time. I know the world community is saying, please, let's not let this escalate. All kinds of leaders have been calling today. International community is not really acting very international. It's more various leaders of various states who've been calling independently. I know Donald Trump is going to talk today to, I'm not even sure exactly which group, but I think the external actors and how they are recognized or not recognized against social media is going to be very interesting to see. And again, I want to stress that I think it's interesting for the world community and the Western community to recognize how serious this issue is for Pakistan. And again, right. Also, a point I haven't made, not again, point I haven't made is somebody who's been coming to Pakistan for a long time, I do think sometimes these things are implanted intentionally to create disharmony. And I think India has been very guilty of putting Pakistan in a very difficult position, as they've done this week. So I hope that answers your question.
Right. No, stay with us, Kirsten. Let me bring this conversation to you. We're talking about the international community's role in the past few days as escalations have risen, especially after the turn of events today that we saw 2 fighter jets be down, Indian fighter jets downed, 2 pilots arrested. Sitting in California, seeing it from there, do you feel that maybe the international community has not done much? Or do you think there was a lot of backdoor diplomacy going on that might have pushed India to finally say that, yes, we're ready for de-escalation?
I think, to be frankly, when we're talking about international community, most of the world don't really understand the root of conflict between India and Pakistan. And if different countries have their own different interests. For example, United States probably just want to see the tension to calm down between the two states, because for U.S. its priority is really Afghanistan, and what happens to be between Pakistan and India is not as much concern to United States. And from United States perspective, it doesn't want to see an escalation to a potential larger war between two nuclear powers. That's Pakistan and India. And there's other international actors involved. For example, China is very intimately involved with Pakistan. Currently, China has this Belt and Road Initiative, which a major component is CPAC, which is a lot of investment into Pakistan to build up the Pakistani infrastructure. And from China's perspective, China does not want to see any kind of instability on its western flanks. And one of the major reasons for China to invest in Pakistan is China wants to see Pakistan that's prosperous and that's stable. And the last thing China wants to see is a big war between Pakistan and India. So from China's perspective, it probably wants to de-escalate as soon as possible. And it's reflected by the speech given by the Chinese Foreign Ministry. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson have urged constraint from both Pakistan and India. But really what China wants to see is to see the situation calm down so it can continue its investment into CPAC and help Pakistan develop economically.
That's an interesting point. CPAC, the Chinese-Pakistan Economic Corridor, we're talking about investment of $64 billion from China as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. But here I want to come back to you, Mr. Rafiq, especially on your point of Kashmiri diaspora. What we've seen time and again is this decades-old conflict. Kashmiris are the ones who suffer the most. While there is, of course, the demand for justice after the Pulwama attack, it's undeniable. Clearly, it is a condemnable act. But at the same time, the fallout that we've seen, this silent panic that emanated across the Srinagar and other places in India-occupied Kashmir, and now the tensions here have risen. What is exactly happening on the ground? Do you see it as an indigenous movement that India doesn't recognize? Or is it, like you said earlier, suggesting that India and Pakistan both have their own narratives, which completely ignores the Kashmiri narrative itself?
I'm glad you mentioned that. Not many people emphasize the human cost of this conflict. There are over 3,000 young Kashmiri men in Indian jails. There are half-widows, and you know who half-widows are, who do not know whether their husbands are alive or dead. There are people being blinded, innocent civilians being blinded by the use of pellet guns, which is actually a shotgun. The human cost of what Kashmiris are going through in Srinagar, in the valley, where most of the trouble is concentrated, needs to be emphasized. And I think I appreciate the fact that you brought it up and gave me an opportunity to talk about it. Other than that, I think you have to remember that there are people in the diaspora, Kashmiris, who will rise to the occasion. In fact, the Musharraf 4-point plan was hatched in a farmhouse in Hudson, New York. So these are, you can go back and forth about how Pakistan is going to retaliate, what India is going to do there. India has its own, at the moment, as I mentioned earlier, an election is looming and Modi has to do what he has to do to retain power, So what else can I say? But
Mr. Rafiq, let me ask you this, Mr. Rafiq. Do you think the way things have turned out in the past 48 hours, could we be optimistic and see this as a critical point in international relations where the Kashmir issue, for once and for all, could not be ignored by the superpowers that are, by the intermediary powers like the UN, that finally maybe Kashmir could get its due attention?
Well, Mr. Rafiq sounds like a hairdresser in Saks Fifth Avenue, so Kathwari or Rafiq would be more appropriate. Secondly, Secondly, the Kashmir issue, it keeps on coming. There are other issues in the world that are more compelling at the moment. Whatever it's the flavor of the week at the moment, there is a comparative historical struggle going on in Palestine, and many Kashmiris I know compare our struggle in Kashmir to the Palestinian struggle. I'm afraid that what India is trying to do with Article 370 or Article 35A is to incorporate the state of Jammu and Kashmir legally into the Indian framework, which of course boosts Modi's chances in the election. Another 20,000 troops have been moved into Srinagar, which is now the world's most militarized zone, as you know. And we know what we go through. The Kashmir Valley is the world's most internet, where the internet has been most curtailed. So my suggestion would be, please talk to the Kashmiris. We have a voice, and we can bring you guys together.
Right. So, Carl, let me bring a little bit of what Mr. Kathwari said here about Kashmir having a voice and let it come to the forefront. Sitting there in California, how do you see it? Of course, it's very tough to catch an audience when it comes to human sorrow. There are bigger conflicts or more violent conflicts taking place, whether you talk about Syria, you talk about Yemen, you talk about the Palestinians. In geopolitics, where Pakistan stands today, where India and Kashmir stand today, how do you see these turn of events where things have gotten really hot between these nuclear armed countries in light of what Kashmir deserves as attention from international media?
So I remember back in the 90s, there were actually a lot more attention to Kashmir issue in the U.S. media. It was being covered for a while, but then the story kind of stopped because the world's attention shifted to our other events like invasion of Afghanistan, invasion of Iraq, the war in Syria, and right now, for most Americans, they're probably not even aware there's still a Kashmir issue. Of course, for audience in Pakistan and India, that's still remain a very fundamental core issue. But for many people in the Western world, there's just a total lack of awareness, right?
So while there's a lack of awareness on Kashmir, how is these tensions between India and Pakistan, how are they being perceived? US obviously has a great stake to have Pakistan equally involved in the Taliban-US talks, right?
Yes. For US, the most top priority has always been military when it comes to the subcontinent. And for US, the top priority is now Afghanistan. And US only basically sees through the lens of Afghanistan. You will see how the interaction between Pakistan and India from U.S. perspective is only matter as much as how you will impact the U.S. operation in Afghanistan right now. And that's how it's been played out in Washington, D.C. Right now, U.S. Chief of Staff has urged, again, constraint on both sides. I mean, that's basically, U.S. does not want this distraction, so to speak, from its own mission in Afghanistan, and and it does not want to see an escalation into a wider war. That's basically as much as from U.S. perspective. That's its cards on the table.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Carl, for your contribution. We really value your time and your input to Newswire. And here, Ms. Kirsten, let me pull you into this conversation. While we're talking about perceptions, we're talking about psychological warfare also. That was pretty much what was going on until things got really messy yesterday. We saw a violation of the line of control. And then today we've seen that happened again. And as a result, the Pakistani Air Force had to down 2 Indian jets. Now, in your perception, how much of this was part of the war hysteria or the sort of social media going viral and taking a life of its own across the border, and how much of this is a real tension, a real tangible threat that had to happen?
I agree with you. I liked the point that you made, that this is maybe finally going to get the attention that it deserves, because it's not going away. Anyone who's been around Pakistan or Pakistanis themselves realize that this has always been the real crux of the issues within Pakistan. Part of the pressure for the Taliban to do more with the Taliban, the reaction to that would have been, well, we will do something, but we need Taliban more to fight Kashmir in case something happens on the eastern border, which I think now we're seeing that. I believe this has been simmering for a long time. I really appreciated what Rafiq said about being a Kashmiri, and Kashmiri Day was just recently in the last month, and being here on the ground and seeing all of the very vivid images of children and the atrocities that have happened to the Kashmiri people, and the human rights violations that India has actually inflicted on Pakistanis. It's gone completely unnoticed. And I know the United Nations addressed this. I know Amnesty International has given reports to say that not one person has ever been held, one Indian soldier or troops or any kind of brigades or civilians have ever been held accountable for what's happened. So I think Pakistan has tolerated a lot, and to go over that LOC really did step over a line. And I think Imran Khan made it very clear that Pakistan would retaliate. And using these words, retaliation, are very, very dangerous words, especially when you're making promises, because then you have to back them up.
Right. So stay with us, Kirsten. Stay with us, Kirsten. Let me quickly come to Rafiq. Just talking a little more about the conversation that took place on the international spectrum between India and Pakistan. Let me get your view, as I take you as a representative of the Kashmiri diaspora in the States. How did you see Prime Minister Imran Khan's response in the consequent then military action that took place as a result of what India did? How did you see his words?
I want to make two comments. One is Mr. Zah may be onto something when he says that the road, basically what he's saying is that the road to Afghanistan is through Kashmir. I agree with that based on what I've read and what I know and my interactions with my other colleagues. Pakistan recently made a statement that the American withdrawal may be subject to what goes on in Kashmir. Something to that effect. So that's one very important point. The other thing that you asked me was what again? Could you please repeat that question?
The second question, essentially, I was asking you to get an idea of what your perception is, as I see you representative of the Kashmiri diaspora in the West, of when these sort of events happen, as we saw the tensions rise between India and Pakistan. How did you see statements coming from, say, the Prime Minister Imran Khan from the Pakistani side, and how did you see statements come from India? How would you reflect on these?
Listen, they have to say what they have to say. As I said earlier, and as you know, that what India says is geared by the election forthcoming in May. So they have to say what they have to say. And, Imran Khan, Prime Minister Imran Khan, just made a statement that it will be beyond our control. What does that mean? It means that this will then be no longer civilians can no longer make the decisions, control the situation. Yeah, that's pretty serious. That's how I look at it. But there are compulsions that both leaders have to follow. Mr. Modi in India has to figure out a way to win the election.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Rafiq Kathwari, joining us from New York. Then with that, we will take a short break. Don't go away. You're watching Newswire. Welcome back. You're watching a special transmission of Newswire. We have in the Islamabad studios analyst Ms. Kirsten Seymour. Kirsten, I want to come back to you on a point that I've been hoping to get covered today, especially in light of what has happened. There's, of course, a lot of what we see across the border from in India, whether they were former generals or they were anchors or they were important political leaders. They were talking war plans just yesterday. The tone has now drastically changed. Is that how you see it? And could you give us your opinion of why that might have changed?
Well, I'm not exactly sure why or how that might have changed. I know social media tends to take on a life of its own. And I also think this has happened so fast and it was so unexpected that you haven't had something on this level between Pakistan and India. And there's been skirmishes and things going on for a long time. But now that it seems to just overnight have become a world noticed event and situation. So again, I think that is a positive thing. But one thing that's been touched upon and not really elaborated on enough is the role of China. And to me, I think that's an interesting role because some of the things that I'm hearing, not just the election of Modi upcoming and sort of, the uprising of sentiment and the antagonism towards Pakistan on the Indian side of the border, and the muscle flexing as well that you're seeing happen. I think that from what I'm understanding and hearing, that as Pakistan progresses and develops with CPEC, with the war winding down in Afghanistan and all of these new sort of advancements that we haven't seen in Pakistan for a long time. It's always been held back by the international community and sort of exploited and used in various ways. And I do think that there is a feeling among the people that India is resentful of that. India feels threatened by that. Therefore, India is sort of purposely creating animosity and disharmony, not just for these elections, but there's this rivalry, like a sibling rivalry, if you will, that is so fervent that there is a jealousy in a sense to hold Pakistan back, to create sabotage against these advancements. And there's also some animosity between India and China that hasn't been mentioned. There's also Iran that hasn't been brought up with pipelines being built between Iran, the IPP pipeline, other pipelines with Russia going through Central Asia. So there's a lot of complexity that we're going to have to see how that plays out. So I think that's going to be, again, a very interesting aspect.
Do you feel that maybe, especially those points you raised, which are really crucial, what is happening in terms of international ties between whether it's Iran and India and then India and China, etc. Do you feel like maybe the actual story gets buried deep between what we see as the media propaganda or psychological warfare between leaders?
I think that's a great point. I think one of the things that gets used and exploited and we lose the story, and it's so easy, is to say extremism, terrorism. Everyone in the world will respond to it. So India, Russia did it with Chechnya. All they have to say is terrorism and everyone gets on board. So as soon as they use these words like extremists, we were targeting an extremist camp, people have gone there in the last 24 hours, no one can find this extremist camp of Jali Muhammad. And so I think that the terminology that we use today for our own political, and when I say we, the world broadly uses to gain advantage or gain fervor for international support, is a dangerous game. And yes, definitely, I think Rafiq's point about forgetting the real people. And I think that's happened with Afghanistan.
Okay, Kirsten, you know what? Hold that thought. Kirsten, I want to come back to you. But first, let me welcome more guests who have just joined us. We have from Paris a political analyst, Mr. Alexis Poulin. Forgive me if I've pronounced your name wrong. And also we have from Riyadh, Mohammad Al Qubaiban, who is a political analyst. Welcome back to Newswire. But first, let me get to you, Mr. Alexis. In terms of the war hysteria that we were seeing in India just until today, as we feel it's simmered down, let's talk a little about the French aircraft controversy that BJP was embroiled in up till 2018. A lot of what BJP has been doing, what Prime Minister Modi has been doing in terms of international conflict with Pakistan, has been seen across the world as an electioneering sort of attempt. Just try to bring into context for us and the viewers, could you give us your summary of that controversy that BJP was embroiled in when it came to the French aircraft?
I can't remember. There was something about buying some French aircraft, and France diplomacy is very linked to the sale of weapons. Right. And as you see in the clash that just happened, it's not French planes, it's Russian, I think, mainly, MiG, and that's where the whole thing comes in. Clearly, there is something about a mise en scène of leaders trying to pretend, and we don't know what exactly is.
Sorry, Mr. Alexis. Let me be more clear on where I was going with this question. Bringing in this controversy, the point was that what we've seen in terms of the Mirage 2000's incursion across the line of control and those 2 Indian jets being down today, the Modi government maybe now is in a stronger position. Before that, it was facing a lot of controversy that it gave favoritism to one specific Indian individual in acquiring these French aircraft. So maybe now, having seen this sort of fight between Pakistan and India, gives them more of an impetus to go ahead and get these aircrafts.
Of course, if you see it, it's all about buying some toys and deadly toys. And there was also the fact that the former president girlfriend was also close to the deal, or there was some talk with her. So things never change. You can see that diplomacy is always linked to war strategy and tension strategy, I would say. And clearly, the plane is not, the first thing. It could have been some clashes at the border, the soft border with Kashmir, but not. It's been an airstrike, a red biplane with Pakistan replying and saying that Pakistan has the capacity to reply to the Indian airstrikes. So, it could be. I see it also as a clear statement of saying, I'm the strong man, we're in crisis situation, crisis time, I'll have to be re-elected, because otherwise, it could be difficult.
And as a result, get a very easy green light in going ahead with the deal that has so far been a major source of controversy that has been brought up by the one of the contesting parties in India, the Congress. Now, coming to you, Mr. Mohammed, just trying to get a handle on what has happened between India and Pakistan. How do you see it sitting in Riyadh, the response that Pakistan gave as a result, downing 2 aircraft? What is your take on whether this was the kind of response that India should have expected, or we might, or something otherwise?
Honestly, I'll be talking in 2 different aspects. I'll speak first as a military, and then I may look at it from where I saw today in the Middle East media regarding the Pakistanis and Indian little of conflict or tension. First, as a military, I was watching the spokesman of the Pakistani army, and what I thought he was saying, or he passed a strong message to not only to the Indians, to the neighbor of the Pakistanis, is there is a borders and there is a respect, and there is a rules of engagement has to be respect. A country like Pakistan is not, excuse my language, is not a short bridge or short sideway that everybody can jump on it. No, it's in a country where it has its own border and it has its own respect. Now, what the action, that's what I thought is the proper action. We experienced this here in Saudi Arabia in 1982, and we recently experienced it with the Turkey and the Russian when they shut down the aircraft. So the borders has to be respected. The security of the country has to be as a number one. And then whatever happened from the Indians, I thought that is a mistake or non-measured move by launching an airplane where it's real quite active area, if you're talking about Kashmir and where is the conflict there. As Christina said a very good point, where people now, Iran, one of them, some of the countries are always using the term is chasing the terror, fighting against the illegal people. So they take it as an excuse and start crossing border. No, today Pakistan send a message to the whole world that we, even though the economic is a big factor, even though that we do want to have a stronger conflict with the Indians or any other country, but sorry, borders has to be respected. From the political side, yes, we do want any conflict between the two countries. Me and you, we were almost 5 days ago in your program, we were talking about Prince Mohammed visit to Pakistan and to India. And one of the things that he was trying to maybe tackle with the prime ministers in both countries is the conflict between the Indian and Pakistanis. And we hear this by Mr. Al Jubair when he talked about it. So we need stability in the area. The economic in Pakistan is raising, as I said the other day, is a 5%. So the Saudis are investing, the Indians Saudis are investing too. So the both countries are friend to us. But again, one more important point here I want to talk about is security for Pakistan or stability of Pakistan is the stability of the Middle East. So what I thought today is the action that the Pakistanis or the Air Force Pakistanis took was the proper action, and I agree with them 100%.
Also, Mr. Mohammed, I want to ask you very quickly about the OIC's when they condemned India's sort of trespassing or incursion into Pakistani airspace. At the same time, there was this issue being raised that why did the Foreign Minister of India be invited to this session? What, in your view, is that a valid protest from the Pakistanis?
Regarding the OIC, I think they tweeted something about the incident happened today, that both countries has to cool it down and look at it more different way. So I buy this and I really appreciate it. But regarding what the Indians are trying to promote regarding the Muslims people, I was watching your channel maybe 1 hour ago. One of your guests or the channel guest, he was talking about the Muslims people cannot perform Jum'ah prayer in India. I don't know how accurate is this information, but this is something I'd like to hear. But again, so the OIC, I think it will play a better role, though there is almost how many, 200 million Muslim in India. Big number. They are almost as the Arabs Muslims number. So we like the OIC to play a bigger role and a better role. It's not only a tweeting that two countries has to cool down and to get back again to the wisdoms and solve their problems. No, we need them to playing a bigger role. And for the other point, which is I did not understand it, can you clarify yourself about the
There was a protest. There was an expression of sort of, how do I put it? Our Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said essentially he would boycott the session in the OIC because the Foreign Minister of India was invited, especially when when the emergency meeting being held was in question on the humanitarian violations in Kashmir, Indian-occupied Kashmir. I was asking you how you saw this response from the Foreign Minister of Pakistan, that why was the Foreign Minister of India invited when India has been the core reason for that humanitarian crisis in Indian-occupied Kashmir?
This is the Pakistani's perspective to it. But again, I look at it maybe different view. I look at it as far as the Indian trying to cool down the relationship with the Pakistanis or improve the relationship with the Pakistanis. Let's go for it. As I told you the other day, I was in your country in 2007, and I knew this is very important issues. Is more important than the Fatah area where it's near Afghanistan or other conflicted area. So Kashmir is not only for the Pakistanis important, it's also for the Muslim nations. And I'm not here talking about discrimination or I'm trying to put Muslims as the priorities. No, we have to respect the law, the international law. We knew this is a conflict, unfortunate conflict. It's since 1947 or something like this. But as far as the Foreign Minister of India hoping that to improve the relationship, it's good for the both nations, and it has the impacted reflected into us here in the Middle East or in the Gulf states. So if I understand your questions, and I hope that I answer your question.
You
That's
did,
my
but
answer to it.
yes, you did, absolutely, Mr. Mohammed. But stay with us. I'm coming to you, Alexis, and I want to go back a little on the way these events have unfolded. Just a little back up to 14th February, the Pulwama attack, and then I'm curious to hear your analysis how the Pulwama attack, where a Kashmiri Adil Dar, a Kashmiri who was held responsible for this suicide explosion. There was a Reuters report that essentially said that this Kashmiri boy was abused and faced a lot of harassment by Indian soldiers. And quickly fast forward to Modi's statement. 1 minute they were inviting Pakistan to fight against poverty, and then telling the world that they have violated Pakistani airspace. Now, I'm curious to know your analysis on how you see these events unfolding and what were the justifications of them escalating so fast?
I think the justification is just self-defense, is the border. And as you say, it all started with the Kashmiri affair. And the Kashmir border is a soft border for years. It's not something that is easy for any country to have a soft border of this size, and especially between India and Pakistan. It's always been a trouble. You can, of course, put it aside and put business first and say that stability has to be paramount, and that both big countries have more in common to share than just a war for a border. But it's always there, and it's always there if you see it coming when elections are coming, or when politicians have to actually man the stage and pretend to be useful. So that's where you have a crisis, and this crisis is coming at this point. And I think retaliation is only the fair answer to this airstrike because of the air control. And just saying that, it was fair retaliation for safety of the airspace and Pakistani people. I mean, it can be that this airstrike are ongoing, and we've seen it in other countries, but you have to make sure that the country's security is preserved, and that's the reason for any government to be in place. So you can't be blamed for this. The question is why India decided to strike this so-called terrorist camp. What is behind, and why the timing? Why now? Without even mentioning it to the Pakistani authority. So there's a lot of question going on. A lot of question also about international diplomacy, because so far France and Europe have been very silent in the crisis. You hear China first and other major countries, but Europeans are way behind and seem not to care. So we have to question ourselves also about the real of this crisis, the international interest behind India and Pakistan.
So the UN has come out and urged both countries to de-escalate tensions, to work through political dialogue. But how, in your analysis, do you see the situation unfolding in South Asia?
I can't read in the future, but I think we have in place two international nuclear powers. They clearly know that this is not a path to war. I think it's more about calming down and saying, no, we have to discuss. But as I said before, they are more in common and they have more interest in working together than fighting each other. So it would be a sort of play and seek and hide with this idea of being an enemy or the border enemy. But in the end, this has been quite a peaceful region.
Kirsten, let me quickly come to you before I come to you, Mr. Mohammed. I just want to sort of highlight the stance that India has taken. A lot of this is being called electioneering in the search of galvanizing votes. How much of that do you think dominates what has happened between India and Pakistan?
The success and advancement, and even The Economist mentioned, of Pakistan could be very dangerous. There are vested interests in Pakistan staying small and under the control of international leaders, and India being the superpower in the area economically. It changes things a lot, and so I think that has to be a factor on some level. There was a mention of the PLO, or the Palestinian-Israeli comparison. And to be honest, that came to mind for me when I first heard about the attack coming over the border, because I thought, well, Israel often hits soft targets. But then when you discover it was more sinister than that, that they actually had intended, and they have apparent evidence that they had intended to actually strike Pakistan with 5 separate bombs, it changes the story quite significantly. And that hasn't been talked about very much or extrapolated on, but that's a concern if that's true, that they really intended to actually bomb Pakistan and weren't able to do so. The Pakistan Air Force was able to push them back, and then they had to unload weight. So I think that military aspect is concerning. The reason I bring up Israel is obviously that wouldn't be a soft target, so it's not a great comparison, but what is a good comparison is sort of the David-Goliath comparison, as well as the aspect that what happens in Israel, which is a seemingly small country, we can all see the history of what's happened in the Middle East and how, you know, the significance of Israel as the bilateral relations with the United States of America and all the other various relations that stem, and also the sensitivity of Palestine throughout the Muslim world. So these variables can actually turn into a very serious situation.
Point, Kirsten.
You brought up a good question about DS.
I'm sorry, hold that thought. I'll come back to you, Kirsten, very quickly to Mr. Alexis. An interesting point that Kirsten was making right now, the comparison that comes to your mind. What would it be when you see the situation tense in South Asia?
Pretty much the same. It's because of all this ethnicity and religious group. It's difficult to have an idea, and clearly you can't just look at it as a border issue. It's wider than that because, as I said, you have international interest coming because of this religious background. So that's where it's more volatile than any other crisis, because you could say, well, we'll have at one point to find a real border and not just a soft border. And if we have to look at the ethnicity of the border, then it's very complicated because it's about land domination. And both countries don't want to go on that route either.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Alexis, for your time and your input there. But before I come back to you, Mr. Mohammed, I will have to take a quick short break. Stay tuned. You're watching Newswire. Hello and welcome back to a special transmission of Newswire. I'd like to welcome General Mohammad Mansha, defense analyst, joining us right now. General, just trying to get your version, your understanding of how the events have unfolded, and especially when the Foreign Minister of India goes in her meeting in China, says that we are ready for de-escalation. What is your take on this?
I think we are into the situation for now quite many days. Since this Pulwama incident took place, this is what was being anticipated. And right at the outset, our Prime Minister had proffered the chance for the negotiation and had offered that Pakistan is ready to cooperate for any kind of investigation. And it shows that Pakistan has never allowed its land to be used by any of the terrorists in the past, and nor it will do in the future as well. But having some kind of a domestic, that is their politicking and their political motive, it was evident, and it was quite being expected that some kind of mischief will take place, and that did take place. As you know, some time back, it was also made some claims of that is the surgical strikes, and those surgical strikes were also all on the WhatsApp, and there was nothing actually which took place. And this is the kind of drama which was again being repeated this time as well. But this time they went a step ahead, and they physically did cross over to our territory, and that is they brought some, there is some kind of payloads out in the jungle near Balakot, and as it was very clearly stated by our political leadership and our military leadership that we will be bound to respond. Please do not misunderstand. Do not underestimate us. And they proved that, and I believe so far our responses have been very well measured, very mature, and very articulate. Again, today, I think the response was very well thought out, and Prime Minister has again given a chance to the peace, and has not only given this offer to the Indian government, but to the entire Indian message that they must come out and they must prevail over this jingoism, and that is the extremism of the Modi government.
General Mansha, do you think that India had a different expectation of how Pakistan would react when yesterday it violated the line of control?
I think India has been underestimating. They thought that Pakistan will take what they are doing and they will just tolerate it and they will not react to it. But I think this was the requirement of the time, and this has been very appropriate because actually their objectives are beyond this. They want to test our, that is, deterrence, and should it get diluted, then they can go a step further. They like to, actually they have the hidden objectives of establishing hegemony in the region, which, fortunate for us and unfortunate for them, we have not accepted so far. We believe in, that is, the equal neighborhood, peaceful neighborhood, but we do not subscribe to any kind of that is hegemony or aggression or their kind of a leadership in the region.
All right, thank you so much, General Mansha. They're talking to us about the events that have unfolded. Coming to you, Mr. Mohammed, I want to carry on this conversation. What, in your opinion, was India, do you think, expecting would happen after yesterday's incursion or the violation across the line of control?
To me, with my little experience regarding the region, I think India did not measure it well, did not play it the proper way. And if the excuse going behind a terror group in an area where it's real quite sensitive I think was a wrong decision. But again, I will reference to what I said at the beginning. Pakistan is a country in the front line. We knew the area is especially the Kashmir area, there is quite long time as a conflict. So Pakistan will not hold looking at some people, they may be, or aircrafts coming for maybe a reconnaissance or maybe trying to measure whatever readiness as the armed force of the Pakistanis. That was a wrong decision. But were they expecting it? I didn't think so. They were expecting that the 2 airplanes will be shut down by the air defense, because this is what looks like there will be an escalating of the problem. They were expecting that there will be a condemned from the Prime Minister or from the Secretary of Defense. But the Pakistanis, again, I concur with them. We face these problems with our neighbors. We faced this problem with the Iranians in 1982 when they launched their aircrafts toward the Saudis. We faced it also from the Iraqis during the liberation of Iraq, I think in 1991 or 1990. They sent an aircraft. So as I said, the rules of engagement, it plays big role. The intelligence, the Indian intelligence should understand that rules of engagement over the district of Kashmir are different than anywhere else. So
also, Mr. Mohammed, just
from the Indians, yes.
Sorry to cut you there, but this has happened soon after the visit of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to Pakistan, where he's obviously signed memorandums of understanding to the tune of $20 billion, including the $10 billion in Gwadar for the oil refinery, and then he's moved on to India. And soon thereafter, things have gotten this bad. This must have obviously been a source of a lot of concern in Riyadh.
Well, Ayza, this kind of conspiracy, I'm not one of the people goes for the conspiracy theories. But I think the two countries are welcomed Prince Mohammed. The two countries signed a couple or many memorandums, deals. So the two countries are completely not, or what the incident happened has nothing to do with the Prince Mohammed visit, or as the newspaper said. I've read this point, by the way. This is very important point. I've read it, that there is somebody trying to fail Prince Mohammed bin Salman visit. As soon as he came back, this is what happened between the Indians and Pakistanis. But this is completely ridiculous, and I'm not going to even look at it. But it's a point being thrown. The way I look at it, it has nothing. We knew the conflict. It's been a long time, but there is. Let me just talk about a point here where the terror group become as an excuse for the countries to start intervene in the other countries. Yes, this is where I think that's very important point.
Right. And
Maybe
I want
we will discuss it today
yes,
or sometime.
Mr. Mohammed, that's a great, and I really do want to come back to it very quickly, and I think it will relate to this conversation with the guest I'm just about to introduce. We have Mr. Shafiq Hamdam. He's a political analyst. You're joining us from Washington, D.C. Welcome to Newswire. A little bringing into perspective what is happening between these in the peace talks between U.S. and Taliban. Of course, Zabiullah Mujahid, the spokesman for Taliban, have come out and in a way condemned what has happened and asked for de-escalation, also that this will affect the peace talks. How do you see it?
The negotiation which is going on right now in Doha has some progress, because we have been witnessing the highest level of Taliban engagement. Mullah Baradar, who's a founding member of Taliban and deputy for politics, or political deputy head of Taliban, as well as the representative of the United States for peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan. They have been talking in Doha, and there has been some progress. However, all the detail has not been out yet, but it seems that it's ongoing, and we expect tomorrow to have at least a draft agreement or a draft declaration between two parties. So there has been some progress as well.
So, Mr. Shafiq, when the spokesman for Taliban comes out and says that this tension or the escalation of tensions will affect peace talks, what exactly does he mean?
He certainly means, and he's clear that, even in the statement, the Taliban has taken side of Pakistan condemning Indian attack.
Mr. Mohammed, what it means to you when Zabiullah Mujahid says that that peace talks will be affected with the tensions in South Asia?
If you're talking about the Taliban talk in Doha, yes, I think that was a good step. Though even the Saudi governments were trying it. Now it's hosted in Qatar, I think, in Doha, with the Americans. As my colleague says, there is improvement, or there is a progress, speaking with the Taliban leaders. Who causes the problems? Honestly, I'll tell you what, the Bin Laden causes where Pakistan become in a conflict. The Saudis being accused, some other area or countries in the region being accused. So the peace talk, it will have a difficulty to go through, or to at least start with, because there is some agenda. I am against the conspiracies, but again, we faced the terror now are increasing. Maybe you didn't know what's happening in Iraq. I'm sorry, I'm sure you know, but what's happening in Iraq and in Syria and Yemen, they are expanding like hell. I mean, you see, they're coming every day, they're born and getting more and more and more. So it's getting difficult. So any peace talk, any, let's say, reforming to fight the terror, even down there in Venezuela or way back in China, I think that's where it will go forward for any peace talk. Even in the Palestine-Arab conflicts, you saw Warsaw meeting was trying to condemn Iran because of their stupid behavior. So excuse my language, where their behavior was not good with their neighbors and caused a lot of terror. So I concur with my colleague regarding the peace talk, but the incident itself happened because to
I'm sorry, I'll have to cut you there, Mr. Mohammed.
No,
I just want to bring in Kirsten to this conversation. Coming to you, Kirsten, as this conversation is progressing, especially in light Of course, there are a lot of conspiracy theories afloat, and it doesn't help when there is a media frenzy also. This is one thing we have seen as tensions have escalated in India. There has been a media boom since '98, and now there are about 150 channels. So they're obviously vying for the same audience, and so maybe the narrative kind of goes off track.
Again, with the social media, I'm not an expert on social media at all, but I know it changes the game significantly. I know that that has been a source of communication for people, and it does tend to, fan the flames. I just wanted to go back quickly about the rules of engagement, because I think that's quite interesting, if you don't mind.
Sure.
In looking at Pakistan's role inside of international community membership. For example, when Mohammed was talking about this, I think that's really interesting to think that Pakistan should do anything but retaliate. Because if you're a member of the United Nations, if you're a member of the EU even, the United States independently, Canada, almost every country in the world will retaliate. It's called encroachment if somebody comes over their border. So I'm not even sure why it's a debate, should they have done that, because that's just a given. And I know Pakistan's recently become a member of the Shanghai Treaty Organization, and I do think that that is part of that membership, that if anybody is to go over another country's border, and I think India would be a part of that, then they have the right to defend themselves and to retaliate, and Pakistan certainly did have the right to do that. However, India failed in this attack because they were pushed back to the border. They didn't achieve their goal of dropping the bombs, thankfully. So the rules of engagement, I think, it's a very good point to bring up, and looking at
Let's
somehow,
hold on to that
I
thought
think South Asia gets put in another category where they're not
of the rules of engagement to our new guest who's joining us. He's a political analyst from Istanbul. Welcome to Newswire again, Obaida Hitto. We're talking about the rules of engagement as they've unfolded when India crossed the line of control yesterday, and consequently today was 2 jets were shot down. How do you take this development?
I think the situation now is not too far out of hand. The Turkish foreign minister spoke earlier today, calling on all the parties, to observe restraint and to find diplomatic ways to get out of this. If you think about it in terms of everything that has happened, has unfolded over the last 48 hours, there hasn't been a huge loss of life, even though the two militaries have, suffered some losses, and we can't, make little of that. There has not been any kind of call for all-out war or any kind of revenge or retaliation in the sense that there's any kind of revenge strikes going on. It's still a tit-for-tat kind of situation. It's still under control diplomatically. There is a huge amount of tension. I think the countries are trying to figure out what the best strategy is to move forward here. The reality is that nobody really knows what the intentions are on either side of the fence here. There's a lot of unanswered questions as to why these planes were in this airspace, what they were really doing there, what was their intention. Was it a provocation that they expected a response to, or maybe the Indians were caught by surprise and received a response they weren't expecting? So there's a lot of unanswered questions here.
But Obaida, I would like to interrupt here and just to answer those questions, if you and of course you are following also the India side of the media coverage, they've come up with these explanations quoting their political leadership. Allegedly, there were terrorist camps they were attacking. They gave a death count of 300 bodies that they managed to count in the middle of the night. They named 2 areas where they dropped the bombs of 1,000 kilos, of course, 1,000 pounds. That was also questioned across the board in different, and it was an open invitation to international journalists to visit the site by the DGISP of Pakistan. So just trying to put in context with what you were saying, the unanswered question, do you still feel that there is not an adequate explanation of why they crossed over the line of control?
Sure, I understand that the Indian Ministry of Defense has claimed that they've targeted a camp with 200 to 300 people, but the evidence that we see being broadcast around the world in videos and in the news broadcasts all over the world today there's no evidence of 200 to 300 people being dead or killed. We don't see any evidence of funerals. We don't see any evidence of families grieving, of bodies being buried or taken out of some kind of rubble or destruction. So I accept that the Indians are giving an explanation. I don't have to accept that that explanation is satisfactory.
Right. Mr. Obaida, I would ask you to please stay with us. And very quickly, I want to come to you, Mr. Shafiq, in terms of what we were talking about earlier. Of course, in the international arena, this is of a grave concern, what is unfolding between Pakistan and India. But if we were to reflect on how it is related to what is happening in Afghanistan, of course, that country has seen enough of warfare, seen enough blood and gore, and it's time to bring peace. Does this in any way affect the progress that is taking place in Afghanistan towards peace?
I would like to add one thing, which is probably a matter of concern, that the United States, during these negotiations, they were considering to draw down their troops or withdraw their troops from Afghanistan. But in such a situation where you have a nuclear state as Pakistan and then an aggression force from India attacking Pakistan, in such a situation, I believe that the United States may reconsider or rethink of its position and policy for its withdrawal. And even during the negotiations, I don't know what would be the condition. Taliban may also, because they have been influenced by Pakistan, they may come with new conditions, which is not clear yet. And tomorrow there will be more lights on these negotiations. But let's not forget that peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan is very critical, not only for Afghanistan, but for the entire region, especially for Pakistan. Pakistan has paid huge amount.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shafiq. With that, we'll have to take a quick short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching a special transmission of Newswire. We were talking to Mr. Obaida Hitto. I want to bring back the conversation from what Mr. Shafiq just said. It is an interesting point indeed, and I care to hear of your opinion on this. The Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi did say that this tension could affect the ongoing Afghan peace process, and it is almost taken like an offense, as if I interpret correctly. How do you see it?
I think that the foreign minister of Pakistan is onto something here. He's looking to have regional actors take a leadership role in trying to mediate this conflict, if you will, or this particular disagreement with India. I wouldn't call it a war yet. So there's a meeting that is expected to happen after the March 31st Turkish elections. There's going to be a trilateral meeting between Turkey and Pakistan and Afghanistan. Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, the foreign minister of Turkey, mentioned that today in his statement on the situation in Kashmir. And he also confirmed that anything that is going to happen between India and Pakistan is going to affect the peace process in Afghanistan. Having peace in Afghanistan is going to allow all of these countries, including Turkey, benefit economically and politically. The stability that will come out of peace in Afghanistan will have major effects on economic efforts, on political efforts to pull some of these countries out of the underdeveloped statuses that they are in into developing economies and to increase bilateral trade between the countries. One of the interesting things about this particular situation is that the F-16s that were used by the Pakistani military were actually refurbished in Turkey about 2 years ago. And so this is just another sign of opportunities that could be, that could be taken advantage of. But there needs to be political stability. There needs to be there needs to be peace so that these kinds of things can enhance and develop, and these relationships can enhance and develop. And even though the Afghan peace talks are being you could say, headed by the United States needs regional actors, needs local actors to be on board with any kinds of decisions or agreements that they reach with the Afghan government or the Taliban.
Right, there's an interesting point you mentioned here, and I'm glad you did, because from that I I've gone through the DG ISPR's press notes. They did categorically say that it wasn't an F-16 that they used in this operation. However, that's not really that important. I want to come back to what the foreign minister, the Turkish foreign minister, said while speaking to Shah Mehmood Qureshi, the Pakistani foreign minister. But here I'd like to first welcome Mr. Khalil Ur Rehman Hashmi. He's joining us from Geneva. You're the DG UN there. And I want to talk a little more about the diplomatic front addressing this issue that is clearly been spinning out of control quite quickly.
Well, thank you. What we have done is the foreign minister wrote within a couple of days to the Secretary General, drawing his attention to the rising tensions in the region immediately after the Pulwama attack. So that letter was sent last week. In addition to that, then the foreign minister also wrote to the President of the Security Council. This is on the peace and security component of that, but also we have worked on the human rights front, the atrocities that the new wave of violence that has emerged in IOK. So the foreign minister also addressed a letter to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And thirdly, also, we are here in Geneva along with the Minister for Human Rights, who spoke to the Human Rights Council yesterday. She met the Human Rights High Commissioner as well. So this is a range of activities that we are undertaking. So it's not just writing letters or also speaking at international fora.
So,
but our ambassadors
Mr.
also,
Khalil Ur Rehman, if one was to reflect a little towards history and then analyze it from this point of view, from today's point of view, how is Pakistan's approach, the diplomatic approach to such issues changed? The Foreign Minister Shah Mehmood Qureshi wrote that letter to the UN just when tensions started rising after Pulwama. How would you gauge this change that we see?
Well, you must have heard the Prime Minister's speech and the remarks that the Foreign Minister has made. I have nothing much to add, just simply to say that there was a situation, as you know, after Pulwama attack. We offered to India, if there was an actionable intelligence, share it with us, and the Prime Minister himself mentioned that we will take action. Unfortunately, that was not done. And then there was, of course, an act of aggression against Pakistan. And Pakistan, of course, in accordance with international law, reserved the right to self-defense, and that right was exercised. But after having done that, I think the Prime Minister has reiterated the call for, for better sense to prevail, and reiterated his offer of dialogue. So there is clearly the approach and the policy is clear from Pakistan's side.
And how is this approach seen in an international forum like the UN, where obviously it's an important international body, can have a lot to say in terms of de-escalation and a lot to do in terms of de-escalation between these two countries? So how is it being perceived there?
Well, there is an appreciation of the perspective that we have shared. We have said that we don't want these tensions to escalate. We are ready for dialogue. The UN Secretary General has also spoken and called on both countries to take measures to avert, escalation. While we are committed to that, but we also have to see things in perspective. Pakistan was not the first one to take any aggressive action. The action that Pakistan has taken is purely in self-defense, and that's in line with international law.
Now, the Foreign Minister of India, Sushma Swaraj, was just in China, and this is taking place, of course, while tensions are very high between India and Pakistan. And she's come out and said this statement where she said that we are now ready to de-escalate tensions. How is that perceived?
Well, any step, we will have to see statements being matched by actions on the ground. So only time will tell. The Prime Minister has laid out the policy parameters, and we hope very much that these gestures or verses that we have made are also reciprocated on the other side.
And here I just want to quote exactly what she said. India does not wish to see further escalation of this situation. India will continue to act with responsibility and restraint. Of course, this comes from the External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj while she's in China to attend the 16th Russia-India-China Foreign Minister meeting. Now, coming back to you, Mr. Obaida, let me quickly come to what I had just touched on. The Turkish foreign minister, he spoke to Shah Mahmood Qureshi, Pakistan foreign minister, and he said basically that he stands by Pakistan and its people in the face of Indian aggression. How do you see this statement?
I think the Turkish foreign minister is expressing the brotherly relationship, or describing the brotherly relationship that Turkey has had with Pakistan. Of course, you know that Turkey also has positive diplomatic relations with India as well. It's not that it's on negative terms with India, but the fact that Turkey and Pakistan are both Sunni Muslim majority nations, they also have the deep-rooted interests in the defense industry and other different kinds of real estate and other investments and things like this. So the relationship between Pakistan and Turkey, from Turkey's perspective, is more valuable in the sense that they have more ideological and more
similarities.
Religious
I know, Mr. Obaida,
similarities.
I understand you need to, you're running out of time. Quickly, one last question, I promise. Just also to expand, the OIC, Pakistan expressed wanting to boycott this upcoming meeting, and Turkey said it would side with Pakistan on that in terms of inviting the Indian External Affairs Minister to this.
So the Indian External Affairs Minister was supposed to be invited, was expected to be invited as a guest of honor to the upcoming OIC meeting in Abu Dhabi. And so the several Pakistani attorneys have sent a request to the OIC to not invite the External Affairs Minister as a guest of honor, and it seems like the Turkish Foreign Ministry is going to support the Pakistani petition in this regard. And I think at this point it makes sense, considering India is not actually a member of the OIC and is going to be invited as a guest of honor, considering the hiccup in kind of diplomatic relations that's still developing. I think it might be a good decision, and I think that's the decision that the Turkish Foreign Ministry is going to stick with.
Thank you so much, Mr. Obaida, for giving us your time. I understand you have a busy schedule. And just a last question to you, Mr. Khalil Ur Rehman, talking quickly about the Prime Minister Imran Khan's speech. How is it perceived in the UN, you feel, with members expressing, what were they expressing when they saw that the Prime Minister, 4 minutes talking about peace, and just the last 1 minute where he responded that any military misadventure will be responded to accordingly?
Well, we've had a couple of meetings since the Prime Minister's speech, and what we hear is a very positive feedback, a very mature, a very statesman-like speech, an approach which is anchored in realism and also in forward-looking, an approach that advocates dialogue to resolve all outstanding issues. And that's the best approach. So overall, it's been a very positive feedback.
Thank you so much, Mr. Khalil Ur Rehman. Now, I want to take this opportunity to quote something Prime Minister Imran Khan said earlier, addressing the nation, where he said, "Our action was only intended to convey that if you can come into our country, we can do the same. From here, it is imperative that we use our heads and act with wisdom." Kirsten, you heard the speech, of course, and just quoting him here, how do you think India will respond to this?
That's a very good question. Looking at why this happened in the first place, we've heard a few, guests tonight say, why now, the timing. There's accusations that right after the Saudi prince was, the visit here, that it happened right after that. So what's the timing about? When you talk about escalation or de-escalation, it's never quite clear how to de-escalate. That word was used with the Ireland North-South conflict that's going on still sometimes today with England. And de-escalation, it's a great idea. Obviously, diplomatic channels are wonderful ideas, but when you have a seeming Greek tragedy with a long, deep, painful history like you have with Pakistan and India, then it's very difficult to know exactly how you're going to de-escalate. If one side intends harm upon the other or encroachment. So if you look at what Modi's army with the military actually did coming over that border, that's the first time that's happened, since the 70s. However, they breached contracts and ceasefire agreements, 3,000 in the last year alone. So, following ceasefires or agreements has a very bad history between, more on the side of India than on Pakistan. So it's the modus vivendi behind what Modi's doing. Now, is it going to be career suicide, political suicide for upcoming elections, that he has basically made a fool of himself, some people might think, by coming over the failed mission and then being counterattacked by Pakistan, much to his surprise, I think. So what will his next move be? Would he be willing to step back and take that, swallow his pride right before the elections? That might make him look weak. So that would be a concern of mine. How would you talk
That's a really good point. I want to talk more about that with you. And let me just invite someone else to the conversation also. We have Mr. Mohammad Marandi, a political analyst. You're joining us from Tehran. Welcome to Newswire. We're talking about how escalation and de-escalation is seen in a historic context and the rules of engagement, but after what has happened between Pakistan and India. What is the sentiment in Tehran in terms of what is transpiring between Pakistan and India?
Well, there has always been a historical sympathy for the plight of people in Kashmir, where they are being unfairly treated by the Indian Army. And in that respect, historically, the Iranians have been sympathetic to the Pakistani side of the argument. I think that there are two concerns in Iran, though, that are more contemporary in addition to that. One is the fact that the Iranians believe that any form of escalation between these two countries at this stage could have immense consequences for ordinary people, and that especially since we're nearing the elections in India, there may be an attempt by the Indian Prime Minister to use conflicts to create greater nationalism to his benefit. And this is something that we often see in the United States, where the U.S. government wages war on countries or carries out airstrikes during key moments. For example, Clinton bombed the Sudan during the Lewinsky affair, and he bombed a pharmaceutical company claiming that it was producing chemical weapons, which it later turned out to be complete nonsense. And as a result, indirectly...
Do you see the similarity, Mr. Mohammed, in what you've just related, these incidents in history? Obviously, in hindsight, its vision is 2020, as they say it. But do you see the similarity, what happened here? Pulwama attack, and then crossing the line of control, allegedly dropping bombs on terrorist camps. And then, do you see the similarity? Do you see a validity in what India did?
No, but I obviously I think that the Indians themselves are probably not happy with the results because of the downing of their aircraft as a result of Pakistani air defense capabilities.
You, Kirsten, his conversation forward also the grave concern that this escalation has created in the international arena, especially in context of these both countries are nuclear armed. It's not a small issue at all.
I would go back to sort of escalation, de-escalation, and how you make deals and how you trust those deals, because as I mentioned earlier, they haven't been adhered to by the Indian side. I think in the international community, people still see India as something from Gandhi. It still has this very soft, very sort of revered image in the international community. So they don't actually see or understand the atrocities that India has been committing against Pakistan. Pakistan, on the flip side, gets a very bad rap and reputation because they get pressure to do more in Afghanistan, although they have lost more troops and soldiers and civilians than 10 times the World Trade Center by now in fighting the war on terror. So I think in looking at peace deals in Afghanistan, I'm really dubious about these peace talks. We've had peace talks going on for 17 years, off and on. The only time they were ever successful was through the military, and other times either no one ever came to the table altogether, or when they finally did, America actually drone striked the peace talk meeting in Wana, Waziristan. So I think there's still a lot of bad blood. And one thing that a lot of the international community isn't talking about is the legacy. Let me just make this point, because it was talked about how Afghanistan and the peace talks might be affected. Well, historically, the Taliban have been exactly what has helped Pakistan in fighting that eastern border. So this thing could turn around completely with needing Afghanistan, which has sort of been Pakistan's brothers in a way. And Pakistan has done a very good job of trying to stay out of it. But if a full-scale war were to take place in Pakistan, I think Afghanistan would get involved in that war and would leave the peace talks in helping Pakistan.
Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that.
That's my
and definitely
background opinion of how that would.
Right. And also, it's interesting that the one debate that has been that Prime Minister Modi has gone this far in trying to grab onto power, stay in power with the elections coming up. It is interesting what the Prime Minister said also, Prime Minister Imran Khan, with the weapons you have and the weapons we have, can we really afford a miscalculation? It really brings into question that what was he thinking, how desperate was this vote bank? And in your opinion, do you think that he's going to achieve that after what has happened?
Well, I think he's already lost whatever he was trying to achieve. I think he grossly miscalculated his approach, and now it's a wonder how he's going to crawl out of that politically and still keep his image and keep his power base. So that's the concern that I think most experts and leaders of the international community have now is, what will it take for Modi to back down and not respond in a military capacity? Imran Khan, of course, has incited that he don't, and that this was just a tit for tat. So sorry to interrupt you there. I just want to welcome Mr. Muzzammil Thakur. He's a political analyst. He's joining us from Geneva. Mr. Muzzammil, just carrying the conversation I was having with our guest Kirsten here, Prime Minister Modi might have miscalculated with the response they've seen after they've lost two fighter jets, one that landed in Pakistani soil and the other in Indian-occupied Kashmir?
It's such a massive miscalculation that if you even look at the Indian media at the moment, the dampened spirits that they have and the realization from the right-wing BJP Hindutva brigade that exists that it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. If they respond again, then there'll be an all-out war. And if they don't respond, then Prime Minister Modi has lost the next election. So in that situation, they have to think very carefully what they have to do. Either power is important or peace is important. One of the two they must choose. But again, at the same time, you have to remember that the common man in India not only is suffering financially, but also they will have to suffer a war as well, which is obviously never welcome. The miscalculation, further to that miscalculation, let's also remember that how this all started. It all started with the Pulwama attack in Indian-occupied Kashmir. And how it has escalated. It escalated because India refused to provide any evidence suggesting that Pakistan had a hand in it. No evidence whatsoever. And then India, in retaliation, they decided to attack Pakistan on sovereign territory without any proof, without any justification, and complete provocation of Pakistan. And Pakistan responded legally. Now, the Indian news channels are now flashing everywhere that, according to the Geneva Convention, that the prisoner of war, the the pilot that landed in Pakistan that has been captured by the Pakistan military. They're banging about the Geneva Convention. I should also remind the audience that India refuses to sign the Geneva Convention. They are not a signatory to the Geneva Convention, because if they were, they would not be able to commit those heinous crimes inside Indian-occupied Kashmir. So it's a little ironic. Not only is it a miscalculation, but they have complete egg on their face. They look ridiculous in the international community. I'm in the United Nations at the moment, and the Indian delegation here do not have a leg to stand on. They have no idea what they're going to do, no idea what they're going to say next, and they're basically just awaiting further details of what needs to happen next.
That's a really interesting point you've raised there, especially in terms of the Geneva Convention, but it also reflects on the kind of short-term memory loss, not just Indian politicians and their masses, but I think it's a universal problem that we forget so quickly. I mean, after all, Narendra Modi, when he came into power in 2014, it was exactly on this kind of anti-Pakistan rhetoric. Don't you think he might just be able to muscle his way in?
It's possible. Look, it's a similar situation as it is in America. You have the complete right wings, those people that were, let's say, hidden for a little while. They didn't want their true colors to come out. But once they had a leader such as Donald Trump to come out, then all that hatred, all that pent-up frustration, the type of people that never used to vote for such people, suddenly they had the availability, the option to vote for a person like that. And that's a similar situation in India. But those extreme right-wing Hindutva nationalists, that so far never had a leg to stand on, because they had people like Vajpayee in power, or they had the Congress that was slightly lesser nationalists. The opportunity is there for Modi to possibly capture. But again, let's see what the options are at the moment for India. If they respond, it goes out into a war. It means international pressure. It means international intervention, which does not look good for the leader of the largest, one of the largest so-called democracies in the world.
Yep.
But at the same time, you also have to remember that if they do nothing, then the right-wing brigade will say that, well, we've lost our leader. This is not the type of leader that we want. In any case, Modi is not necessarily the figurehead of the BJP. You also have to remember that they have other members that are even more extreme than Prime Minister Modi. For example, you have that Yogi that is from UP. He is also a contender for the prime ministership. So
I'm going to have to stop you. It's a delicate situation. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Muzzammil. A very valuable input from you. We appreciate your time. And Kirsten, also for sitting through this really heated debate. And I wish we could get into it more, but we've run out of time. It's come to the end of the show. And before I leave you, I want to leave you with some important words that Prime Minister Imran Khan said addressing Pakistan today. And this was, and I quote, "Our action was only intended to convey that if you can come into our country, we can do the same. From here, it is imperative that we use our heads and act with wisdom." We can only hope that in the days to come, in the hours to come, this wisdom will prevail across the border and there will be a de-escalation of tensions. And with that, I will beg leave. Stay tuned to Indus News to stay updated with what's happening. Goodbye.